everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, online medical education events, digital investigator protocol meetings, and all sorts of other things. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've also been helping companies with, innovation hackathons, MSL and sales rep training, corporate events, and everything in between. But more importantly at Impetus, we believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from some of these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, digital provocateurs, and healthcare thought leaders, we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super excited about having one of these thought leaders at the table with me today. This is actually Irlene Biggs. She's actually leads an award-winning analytics and research team at ICON's Access commercialization and communication service line. She's also a thought leader in research in actionable analytics. Arlene has worked with Fortune 500 companies on a variety of issues across major industries, focusing on healthcare and pharmaceuticals for the past 20 years. And in the course of her career, she has led both syndicated and ad hoc research programs. She's also developed proprietary models for measuring customer relationship equity, sales effectiveness for pharmaceutical manufacturers. She's also built market research systems and processes in 3 different organizations, as well as she's advised on many, many more. Arlene also serves as an adjunct professor at Villanova University. She teaches business and process management courses for professional certification programs. Welcome, Arlene. So happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
Absolutely. Besides the fact that you're wearing pink, which I love, we must have great minds alike, is I'm very interested in your background, obviously working for a world-renowned analytics company in the life sciences space, doing really big, pivotal things. Love to learn a little bit, Arlene, about your career trajectory, what led you through STEM, through science, and how you landed in such a great place that you are today.
So, and I love to be thought of as a provocateur, something that I'm going to have to add to my list of goals in life, I think. But I have an interesting journey, I think. I started out in psychology. I think all my life I've always had this curiosity, wanting to know what people are doing and why they're doing it. And so my undergrad work is in psychology. I went to the Cal State University system, and I did graduate work in social psychology. I quickly learned or decided that I really didn't want to be a therapist, and the academic life was not really for me at that point in time. So with the skills and the knowledge that I had acquired along with that curiosity, it kind of threw me into the market research industry. And I started out as a generalist, building full service market research services for a call center that was trying to transition. And just by nature of their business and their customer base, became a specialist in customer satisfaction. And I started out building voice of the customer programs for small, mid-sized organizations. And when they decided to close business because the owner was changing their interest, I landed in with a small firm here on the East Coast called Health Strategies Group, which in pharma, they were small, but they had a really mighty reputation. They had some syndicated reports that they delivered in covering health plans and PBMs, and they were developing one for hospital and health systems. And sort of that's where I got my entry into the pharmaceutical and clinical side of the business. And from there, it sort of just evolved, right? I was with Health Strategies for 13 years. I came in as an analyst role, kind of stepping back, adding quantitative expertise in there. And that's where I really began to build out my understanding of the commercialization side of pharma, and how data and analytics really impact that. So I helped with a lot of their proprietary models, building out their Salesforce effectiveness, payer equity, and then building infrastructure for them. So when I left Health Strategies Group, I was responsible for their enterprise level operations, to conduct the research behind their syndicated services. From Health Strategies Group, I had the opportunity to move into a company called Media Managed Markets, which was a full service agency. And in that role is where I really began to get a taste of the analytics side of it with diverse data sets, not just market research. And you built out my understanding and really how not just how research and data helps you understand the marketplace, but how you can have an impact on the marketplace. Media Managed Markets was acquired by ICON, which ICON is a clinical research organization. So they contract out for clinical trials as their core competency, but they're building out their ability to support commercialization. And I've continued to build and develop sort of that expertise, that understanding on how you can use data from a lot of different sources to not just understand the market, but impact the marketplace. And as part of that, an organization that works from ideation on a trial to delivery of a product into commercialization, it's seeing how that data comes together at all phases of that product development and impacts not just the marketplace, but providers and patients and product decisions all along that way.
Absolutely.
And that brings me here.
Beautiful. And in your role as VP of Market Research and Analytics, which is probably an extremely broad stroke position with a lot of really interesting aspects to it. So I just want to dig into a few of these aspects. First of all, you're catering to a very complex world. So again, with pharmaceutical sponsors, but dealing with healthcare providers, investigators, patients, all the layers in between. And so there's this incredible layer of complexity that your organization is playing in. So let's actually just focus on the whole idea around clinical research. Clinical research for pharmaceutical companies is the bedrock for innovation and bringing novelty and bringing value to the system and to patients, and really is the lifeblood, if you will, of an organization in terms of being able to propel invention. And so this has been going on for years and years. We have certain standards and practices. I was actually just curious about, maybe we'll just start off about what happened a few years ago with the advent of COVID-19. Can you just tell us, in your viewpoint, what happened to these standards and protocols and these ways that we've been doing clinical research for years and years? What happened when COVID-19 occurred?
So, great question. And it is a very complex dynamic that we live in. When COVID-19 occurred, worldwide, people were having to isolate and we're no longer able to engage in the world around them as they normally do. So with clinical trials, what happened was, in the need to have paced, documented, scheduled care around diseases that are in trials, that was interrupted, right? So the ability to hit those milestones in terms of the execution of care that's required in clinical trials became very difficult. So there was a little bit of a scramble to try and how do we kind of hit those markers? How do we make sure there's no interruption in care during those clinical trials very quickly? In some cases, it was really switching out treatments for some of the more standard of care, sort of postponing the trial, if you will. You almost have a stop gap between data collection issues, those had to be handled on a sort of a trial by trial, case by case basis in terms of what was acceptable. The other piece of that, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of talk about decentralized clinical trials, but it was really, what do we, where are there situations where care can be provided by an alternative means? Where can we use non-contact procedures to be able to continue with care in a trial? And fortunately, in development, that had already been sort of some consideration, right? We're thinking about how can we be more efficient. So there was already some thinking behind it, and it just accelerated our ability to really put forward ways in which we could provide care through alternative medicine methods and capture and track that data. So those kinds of procedures had to be really more standardized and put in place very quickly, and then monitored. I think it expedited the whole idea and acceptance of decentralized trials, and having had a little bit of foundation to move forward on that was very helpful.
Absolutely. So it's really interesting that you're talking about decentralized, and again, the new idea around hybrid. So what has hybrid done? Why do we use that word?
So hybrid is sort of our fancy way of saying, well, we're going to try and do part in person and part through alternative means. In terms of a trial, it's really a reflection of multimodal care, for lack of a better description. There are some things that really you need to have some face-to-face interaction with when you're thinking about treatment or evaluation of the condition, or some treatments have to be administered in office, some don't. And then there's check-ins that you have to have, follow-up care with a clinical trial to capture that data. And so if there's means in which you can do some of that care, either, through a teleconference or a video conference, to continue with that. Also, that's sometimes determined by your target population or by, the region of the country that you're in, and connecting with the patients to do that. The other way in which we see this happening, especially in rare disease, so very small patient populations, and you can't expect them to all be congregated in a one or two geographies near a center of excellence. But the decentralized and the hybrid approach allows for recruiting of patients wherever they live, and then tapping into providers in those locations. So physicians and people who would be treating these patients that would not be considered an investigator necessarily now can be brought in to the study and be providing care, even if it's just for one or two patients in their control. So we've even widened the access to being able to conduct patients as well. So
it's really interesting that you're speaking about that. We hear a lot these days about inclusion, diversity, serving underprivileged populations and underserved populations. So what an interesting thing about how you're saying that this was, an unlikely benefit, if you will, of a terrible situation with a pandemic that literally, changed the world. So is that really what you're speaking to?
Yes, I believe so. I think it is an opportunity to open up accessibility to clinical trials and other forms of treatment. Even if you go beyond clinical trials, there's certainly application in just regular care. But I do believe it does open up those avenues that can level the playing field.
So Earlene, of course, we're talking that this was a spur or an accelerant of something that technology was over time potentially going to do. Mm-hmm. So there was a groundswell of momentum that really pushed people over the precipice to accelerate the utilization of telemedicine and Bluetooth generated kind of technologies and what have you. But I'm just also curious around some of the legacy frameworks that are already in the system, have been around for years, especially around how clinical trials are formulated, their process, really important things like clinical endpoints and what's standard and has been for many, many years. How are we asking courageous questions about these legacy frameworks? And if so, what are those questions and what are we doing to sort of pin and prod what's been there for many, many years?
So I'm trying to think how to formulate this answer. I think that the key, I think, is what are those legacy frameworks? What ones are working and working in the new environment? I think one of the things the pandemic did from an organizational perspective, and probably across other industries as well, is look at which of those frameworks have flexibility and can we be more agile with them, for lack of a better word. It's the word of the day, I think, right now. And what's the purpose of the framework? So those legacy frameworks are in place to ensure patient safety, to ensure quality, and things like that, to help companies who are developing products follow a standard set of steps to achieve positive benefit for the product, for the patients. And we need to stay true to that core, right? Because that's important. So how can we sort of use those frameworks in a new environment or a new setting? So all of those things are still important if you move to a decentralized trial or if you speed up a clinical trial. We were, ICON was part of an important part of the clinical trials for Pfizer's vaccine. And, when they began development of the vaccine to the time they delivered it for a pharmaceutical product, that was amazingly short turnaround time for a clinical trial. If you look at sort of those legacy frameworks that we use, but we were able to look at the framework, what's the purpose and follow that, but within a shortened time frame. So what's necessary and critical, and what is it that's busy work that's part of the framework, and able to deliver against sort of a new need, a new standard in that situation. And that learning and that confidence that we can do it is carrying forward to all the other work we're doing since.
So when we talk about endpoints, we're oftentimes thinking about auditors or seeing a patient in a clinic or an institution of some sort and tracking blood results and doing something concretely through some sort of an administrator or healthcare provider. Now we actually hear a lot about things like patient-reported outcomes and the reporting of information either biometrically or ambiently through a series of different kinds of tools. How have some of these new tools and technologies come into play in the clinical trial environment and beyond in terms of remote monitoring? What are some of these things and how is this impacting the way we do clinical trials and in the future?
So with clinical trials, when in a clinical trial, when they talk about, you're talking about endpoint, it's really very different than what we think about as, lay people, non-physicians or medical scientists, right? When they think about clinical endpoints, it's about the results that's delivered from, the disease impact. Right. So, so for example, in cancer, your endpoints are around, disease-free progression, survival rates. Sometimes with diabetes, it's about what are your A1C metrics, your blood sugar, the things that are trackable and the things that the medication or the treatment are supposed to impact. So it's very finite measures that results in data that can be analyzed. And then when we talk about patient-reported outcomes, those are more kind of touchy-feely things, right? It's outcomes of do you feel better? Is your mobility better? And they're harder to measure, and we have to trust the patient to be able to do that, to say, yeah, I'm have less pain. I can walk better. So they're a little bit softer, and you know, historically, we've struggled with some of those softer measures because, you know, hard science likes those specific numbers that you can work with. But it's becoming more and more important because those are indicators of quality of life, and over time, and recently, it's been a stronger emphasis of that. Treatments need to include that quality of life, not just extension of life. And that's where the patient-reported outcomes become more important. And then the wearables, right? Those ambient metrics help physicians to record some of those harder metrics without having to be present on a daily basis, and then be able to link that more strongly with some of those reported outcomes. And I think that pattern will continue to grow. Having the technology develop where you can have those sensors that will report that data has really pushed our ability to provide daily care and to provide a more 360 picture of a person's health exponentially.
It's really interesting that you say that. So, you know, now there's data coming from all kinds of sources, all kinds of places. Where I'm also thinking about the idea of digital pathology, diagnostics that are now creeping up and are kind of everywhere. Even the idea of things like biomarkers and even genetic markers. Like there's, you know, the whole analysis around that. Now we're looking at this cornucopia of data. I was curious about ICON or other partners. Is there going to be the super platform, the super app, whatever it is, that somehow is going to integrate this with smart algorithms, machine learning, AI, that somehow will do all of this stuff? I mean, this is information coming out of your wazoo. It's almost overwhelming. And information for its sake is not really very informative. So what are we going to do with all of this information flowing from everywhere?
And that is the key question. I think that the future, if you will, and we're moving towards that. I don't know that we'll ever be at a single platform, but we at some point, you know, we're striving for ways in which we can, you know, use all of this data together, because, you know, data is a snapshot, but when you have 12 snapshots of a scene and you can put them together, you get a bigger picture. And when you can have that, show how that develops over time, you know, your picture even gets more robust, and you know more about what you can do or what you can expect, how you can solve a problem. You know, and technology is moving in that direction. Right now, you know, of course, there's AI and machine learning comes up with those algorithms on how you process data, get it to a point where it can be used. Other technology that's, I think, is really important and going to play a big role in that is tokenization. Tokenization is where, you know, an individual's data, you identify it and then you give it a token, which represents their data kind of across the board, and you can use that token to integrate data from limitless sources and link it all together, but it's de-identified, right? So you can get some of that sensitive data, that information that we need from patient care and clinical trials. And the great thing about that, or maybe it's the wondrous thing, is once you tokenize that data, you can look retrospectively across their information, as well as, you know, in the future, and think about the connections you can make, the patterns you can find, how you can you have such a more robust view of what that experience is for that patient. And then you can look across that for, thousands of patients and really then have a view of how well is a treatment working? What are the options? What did they try before? What situations are in their experience, their life that may be impacting that? Have they been adherent, which is a big challenge in healthcare? And so taking all that in. So tokenization has a huge potential in there, and it's already in play. So Symphony Health, which is an Icon company, has a tokenization process, and they connect a lot of the utilization, formulary, lab, hospital data, and are moving in that direction. We're looking at how do we do that at the clinical trial phase as well. Think how much that could add in our ability to develop products and know what that impact will be. The second technology is blockchain, right? Blockchain is a way in which you can kind of transfer that data and share it across the board to make that whole process much easier.
You have touched on so many amazing things, and quite frankly, we can have entire shows about everything you're talking about, but just trying to double click a little bit on some of this, both the tokenization and the blockchain piece. There's almost like a healthy tension between multiple sides of the equation on both of those. And in some ways, I guess they're a little bit of the deterrence for us for rapid change. And one of those arguments for or against is the opportunity, the issue around security and access. Lots of people pushing back on, who owns the data, who makes money on the data. This whole idea at some point could patients basically monetize their tokenized data. So where does that whole argument go? And then, like I said, the other issue around cybersecurity, and but of course, the benefits of all that data sharing is, the global knowledge that is going to infiltrate the world around population health management and innovation. So why this intense tension between all of those schools of thought? And are we seeing any indentation either way on moving forward with these really innovative technologies on either sides of these arguments?
So I think the tension in a lot of ways comes from lack of understanding and maybe some concern about my personal territory, right? Because tokenization, so both tokenization and blockchain actually supports increased security and privacy if they're executed in the way they're intended to be executed. Tokenization ensures, it de-identifies data, it ensures privacy and confidentiality. So, we learn a lot about, in the healthcare domain, we learn a lot about the healthcare process, but we don't learn who we can't individualize to that person based on their data. That would be a conversation that would have to happen individually. The blockchain technology, it really is just a digital ledger. And what a blockchain technology does is it ensures that the transfer of data and the events that are recorded in that data cannot be edited or changed. So it ensures the integrity of the data. So they're not going to replace other security, but if they're used where they're supposed, in appropriate places, they're not going to become a huge security risk. In fact, they're going to help improve in some areas the security risks. But it's just identifying where it's appropriate to use those technologies and then leveraging that.
So the incorporation of all these technologies, as you mentioned earlier, Arlene, was very, very rapid. And there was actually a question from the audience here about, like, literally COVID flicked the switch and said, thou shalt use all of these things. Now, the question comes down to, like, the idea around synthetic data and this accumulation of this data that's being tracked and used for clinical trial and innovation and, creation. Where does this come in terms of regulation? So we talked a little bit about legacy infrastructure. The regulatory process is one of those. But I think that, organizations like the FDA are trying to rapidly change to accommodate all of these technologies. In your opinion, how well are they doing here, and what else do they need to do in order to approve a lot of these systems that are accumulating all of this synthetic data?
Okay, well, I don't know that I would call it synthetic data, right? Because data occurs everywhere. Everything we do, everything we say, it's generating data. It's just how do we use it? It's not like we're creating or making new data. So I think some of our language makes data scary, and it's not. And the FDA in their current procedures, it's that you submit your data, your findings, they review it, and as we implement these new technologies, what it does is it speeds up sort of the transfer of information, the communication, and what they need to do is think about how to accommodate that speed a little faster. I mean, one of the kind of criticisms, for lack of a better word, with FDA is it takes a long time. But it's because they need to be very particular in reviewing that data and making sure that it's accurate and represented appropriately, and that it's going to benefit patients and not harm patients. And that's their job. They're really supposed to be protecting the patients, the welfare of the patients. And it's difficult to say you need to be quicker at doing that, but you need to be thorough. And if they can leverage technology and add skills in their system to be able to leverage that technology to do their job quicker, which is to evaluate that data thoroughly and protect the patients, I think that would be where I think they should go for whatever that means. But I think that would benefit everybody in the whole regulatory drug development system in the US.
Health economics, outcomes research, market access, pricing, reimbursement. I mean, this is an entire science on its own, and with an entire set of data and infrastructure and regulation and legislation and process. I'm curious, especially around, health technology assessment countries becoming much more popular and having a lot more influence. Tell us a little bit, Arlene, about what ICON does, or what some of the research that you do to enable these value conversations and assisting with this whole space around access and reimbursement.
So that area is sort of our bread and butter in my team. In countries that are ex-US, every country has their own process, their own governing body, like the FDA. So what you need to understand is what is the purpose and the guiding points of that governing body in that country, and then understand what they're looking for in terms of their efforts to provide appropriate care for their citizens, their population, and how are they choose to protect them, and then help pharma understand what it is that they're looking for, and how does a product under consideration meet that expectation. So we're sort of trying to understand that the market dynamics, where there's gaps and benefits, and then helping pharmaceutical organizations understand that and see where they can provide value or not, right? And that's different for every country. In the EU, the UK has NICE, and they look at very different things for making a product accessible than, say, Germany, who is very focused on patient welfare and quality of life, and it's part of their consideration. Whereas the US, sometimes it's more do no harm and what the cost is in a lot of cases. But the outcomes measures, as we talked about before, is very important in that, because products deliver on a number of outcomes, and each of those may have varying level of importance across some of those different governments and governing bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex issue and data is always behind it. So lots of things I think that ICON is involved with. And I think just to sort of change gears a little bit and talking more about the people part of business and the people ways, we talked a little bit about inclusivity, diversity. Culture has become a huge component of companies attracting and retaining great talent. We all have heard about the Great Resignation, and it's really difficult to get really great help. And this has been a global issue. So I was just kind of curious, ICON works with biotechs, biosimilars, you work with public health, medical device companies, pharmaceuticals, but this goes beyond, the healthcare space.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say personally around everything from mentoring team leaders, and really just what sort of advice do you have for individuals and professionals trying to attain and attract great talent, but also to be that great talent working for an organization like ICON?
That's a big question. And I think in today's world, that's really important. We've come to a spot where we can be so intentional about diversity and inclusivity at an organization. I think that's huge, and I think it's a wonderful thing. At an organizational level, we have put in place a diversity, inclusiveness, and I can't remember, behavioral team, something like that. But we have some interest groups, right, across the board for disparities in racial diversity, for the LGBT community. I probably got those letters wrong, and I apologize. But also beyond that, we have interest groups for people who are caregivers of children or caregivers of their parents. There's a lot of things that make us diverse. So it's important that organizations invest in that level. As a manager, your job as a manager is kind of two things: retention and results. We make the mistake when we focus only on results or only on the retention. It's really about the relationship, and as a manager, how we communicate and set up an environment for inclusiveness is through those relationships with the people that we work with and who work for us. And we need to remember that to think about that relationship more fully, right? As a mentor, you're responsible. What your job is, it's not to be a fountain of all knowingness, right? It's really to share your knowledge that you have, share your time, and share your resources to help someone else. And you do that without expectation of anything in return. As a manager, your job is to share your knowledge and share your time and your resources with your people, but you do that with the expectation that they're going to deliver good work. So to be inclusive and create an environment that's going to retain talent and build talent, you need to push that to the step farther, where you are able and willing to do that in areas beyond just what they need to do their work well. And that's really what's going to create that inclusivity and that retention of good talent.
It's going to be very interesting, Arlene, in the months and years ahead, to determine where this whole hybrid work situation is going to fall through, and how companies are going to provide those opportunities for people. So we shall see what that looks like. Tons of things to talk about, some really pivotal work that you do at ICON and what ICON does in general. For anybody who's listening to the show and would like to connect with Arlene, to pick her brain, to connect, to partner, to find out more about ICON, please look for her details in the show notes below. We also encourage you, if you enjoy the show, check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of conversations that we do asynchronously and synchronously with sponsors and physicians, payers, allied healthcare providers, and patients. through a series of touch points over time to develop strategies, tactics, to do work, to plan meetings and clinical trials. We'd love actually to see you check out impetusdigital.com. Please like and subscribe to our channel. And we really love if you can leave us some feedback on iTunes. We want to thank everybody for their time today. And thank you, Arlene, for a fantastic conversation.